You know, I recently had a doctor's appointment. I go to a doctor, and I'm a doctor. And my doctor got freaked out at my cholesterol. He goes, oh my gosh, your cholesterol's so high. You know, your total, your LDL is like through the roof. We got to do something. Of course, he wants me to go on statins. We've had that 10-year-old conversation. But he goes, oh, well, in the very least, let's go get a carotid scan. So we did an ultrasound of the carotid, and everything's fine. And that's the end of the topic. Which brought me to this particular video, which is I should show you, I should show him, I should show everybody how to have perfect lipids, how to have a perfect cholesterol panel so your doctor won't have to worry about it, and why you should not do that. Talked about cholesterol before. You can see those videos above, link above, playlist even, but let's get into it now. Okay, how to have perfect cholesterol without medications, and why you shouldn't. For those who've been following various videos that I've done in the last few anyway, what we're doing is we're taking a metaphoric hike up to Everest with camp after camp after camp, but the base camp is about insulin resistance, HOMA-IR. And we've gone to inflammation, we're now at cholesterol, we're going to get to a number of topics that have to do with insulin resistance. The point of this is, yes, insulin resistance, but little things that you can check in on yourself, actionable things you can do to keep yourself out of trouble for the rest of your life. So if you're 15 or you're 115, all of this is important. And by the way, by doing these little things we're talking about here is going to make an enormous difference in the rest of your life. Okay, so let's get going. This is the hike we're taking. I hope you're going to come along. Some concepts you need to know first before we get started. And one of them is, how do we calculate body weight? We talk about body weight all the time. Well, one way you see in studies, and maybe your doctor talks to you about it in this way, what's your BMI, sir, honey, whatever? I don't think BMI really serves us well. I mean, it's something that's basal metabolic index. I tend to think in pounds, but if you're interested in how to calculate your BMI, this is how you do it, and there's a link to do that. I'm going to be referring to overweight as to over an ideal body weight. It's a population reference, and this is how you find out what I'm talking about here. So I'm 5'10", a guy 5'10", it's basically pretty much height and gender, and 160 pounds, 161. So I happen to be exactly my ideal body weight, but I don't really care if you're 20 or 30 or 50 pounds or 100 pounds or 200 pounds over your ideal body weight. It's not my issue, and it's certainly not a judgment, but I want to explain what this is. This isn't anybody over that weight is fat, or, no, actually, I'm going to show you how it's a useful number, but it's not that useful, and there's a lot of exceptions. Okay, let's get going. So how is insulin resistance measured? I'm quickly going to get these next few slides through this because I've covered this probably in 10 other videos. If you're watching for the first time, HOMA-IR is insulin resistant. It's a range of numbers, and the numbers depends on a calculation between fasting insulin and fasting glucose, and anything 1.4 and under is non-insulin resistance. Anything 1.4 and over is insulin resistance. Done and over with. Okay, this is basically what we're talking about in terms of cost. Fasting glucose, fasting insulin, go get this done on yourself, really. Go get this done on yourself. And that's Quest. So I don't know why Quest is more expensive. Prices vary. It's kind of like stocks, check the day. But for the most part, this is what it costs. I don't get anything out of it. So you can do this for yourself. This is point one. You can do this for yourself. Go get it done. This is after you've gotten those two numbers, your insulin, your glucose, fasting insulin and glucose. You can plug them in here. The nice thing, these toggle back and forth. Here's the link for that. And so United States is the only country in the world that is not on the metric system. So they have one set of calculations. The rest of the world, you just toggle it back. Okay, so you can figure it out wherever you are in the world. And if you really want to do this by hand, here's the two formulas, right? Here's the United States. It's not so much we'd like to be different as somehow we can't learn the metric system here. And this is for the rest of the world. Okay, so that's that. My point is, and I'm very big in labs, people who work with me do 4 different panels. And we're just talking about a portion, a very superficial portion of one of the labs that I do, but it's not that superficial. It's important. So my point here is, and I borrowed this, is like, you can't manage what you don't measure. Labs are a metric. Labs are a measurement. And if you want to go through life and not know your labs because you're afraid of what the labs might be, like somebody's telling you you're overweight when it could be a healthy overweight that you are, by the way, hint for what we're going to talk to in a second, it's important. Labs are important. They're apolitical. It's where I go to find the truth and to look for relationships. There's no marketing there. There's no propaganda there. It's just a clean place to be and for me to ascertain, to describe, to analyze where people are. So background. So people come to me. This is not an advertisement for me, but it's what I do and where I get the data, and that's what you need to know. People come to me. They do their labs. labs, I put in a big spreadsheet. From the spreadsheets allows me to do scatter plots. These are examples of various scatter plots I threw up as an example. They're all happen to be thyroids, right? But it allows me to see a relationship and to plug in a person's information to find out of where they are, instead of just saying, hey, there's a range, you're between 1 and 5, you're doing fine. Well, I don't know. What about other things? And I find this has been a real eye-opening way of looking at data in the last couple of years, really. So let's get started. How to have perfect cholesterol. And I kid you not, how to have perfect cholesterol. There's 2 things you need to do, and we're going to elaborate. That's the point of this video. One is have a high carb diet. Specifically, have a high refined carbohydrate diet. Specifically, grains and starches. So you can have donuts. There you go. That's a grain. It's a really refined grain, and a lot of other crap in there too. But you have glucose and all these other things. Have a diet of donuts, and you will have great cholesterol. Am I being a bit facetious? I'm being truthful, but yes, I'm being a bit facetious. Also, the second thing you have, and I've done a number of other previous videos, link above about history of cholesterol and so on. I'm not going to go into that this time, but I'm just going to touch on it. And then is have high polyunsaturated fatty acids, i.e. vegetable oils. There's a whole history of that over the last 70 years. It started under the Ansel Keys, et cetera, et cetera. Link for that above to go into it. It's a great story, understand, but I'm not going there now. So vegetable oils, what are they? They're soy and corn for the most part. You know, everything else that you can do others, but it's basically seed oil, if you will. So the secret formula is, you need to write this down. Secret formula is refined carbohydrates plus seed oil on a regular basis, fats, polyunsaturated fatty acids equals perfect cholesterol levels. Done, that's it, whole video's over. It works every time, but there's a catch. It's dangerously unhealthy. It's dangerously unhealthy. And this is the standard American diet. And it's been that way for the last 70 years. And it's not going to change. So if you use the formula correctly, you'll be in an early grave. But here's the easy way to get your LDL, which is part of your cholesterol, and your total cholesterol down. But it will cost you dearly. So I'm going to show you how to do it. I'm going to keep to my promise. One is you be overweight. 2, you be insulin resistant. You don't have to be very insulin resistant. Have a high omega-6-3 ratio. I'm going to go into the details about this, but boom, boom, boom. Here's the first of the scatter plots. Here's your total cholesterol, LDL, HDL, right? The green is total LDL, HDL. Notice as you become more and more overweight, this is over your ideal body weight, your cholesterol goes down. So by being overweight alone, that was the only thing you did in your life, but being big, either muscle or whatnot, your cholesterol will go lower. Isn't that amazing? The other is to be very insulin resistant. Since insulin resistant is kind of an academic thing, it's the insulin and the glucose or the HOMA-IR number. So the HOMA-IR number is all this on the bottom. As that number gets bigger, your cholesterol drops. Look how quickly the LDL drops. Wow, that really drops. What about the omega-6-3? Basically, omega-6, people tend to say all seed oils are omega-6. That is true. But all omega-6 are not seed oils. So they're closely related, but not completely, okay? So the omega-6-3 ratio, and omega-3s are fish oils, EPA, DHA. Done plenty of videos on that if you want to look for those in the library. Okay, so what this is here, now we're doing the ratio, omega-6-3 ratio on the bottom here. Look at this. We should be at a 1-to-1 ratio. And that actually did exist in our on Earth and natural living people. If you remember talking to, when I talked to on my podcast anyways, Dr. Artemis Anopoulos, she was with Ansel Keys back in those early days of doing the 7-country studies, which was really 26 countries. But in Crete, they had 1-to-1. 1-to-1 ratio. Whoa, this is back in the 50s. Times have changed. We're all on junk food, right? We're all back to donuts and seed oils. But back then, it was good. So the 1-to-1 ratio, they tend to say, well, in industrialized countries now, it's just, if they get to 1-to-4, that's okay. I mean, a 4-to-1, 4-6 and 1-3 is like, that's okay. Shoot for 1-to-1. That's where you should be. That's how we evolved from. Do it. Okay, but anyway, as the ratio gets worse, as you can see, your cholesterol gets better. As your ratio gets worse, higher 6 and lower 3, your cholesterol gets better. What the heck? What the heck? We are missing something. Obviously. What is it? We'll get to that in a second. So let's go deeper on these 3 topics. You need to understand, if you can understand these 3 things, not only will you understand how to get perfect cholesterol, which is the point of this video, understand why you shouldn't do that, but you also have some actions to take. It's not just academic. This is meant to motivate you out the door, take care of yourself. So if you are 15 to 115, there's little things you can do to keep yourself on an even keel, okay? Be overweight. Seriously. Yep, seriously. Triglycerides is what's missing, of course. Triglycerides is part of what they call your lipid panel. Then this is the same reference, right? This is your pounds overweight relative to cholesterol. This is what I've showed you before. Now I just put in the recommendations. This is the AMA, American Medical Association, recommended levels of having a total cholesterol under 200 and having an LDL under 100 and having HDL above 40 and triglycerides under 150. So that's what their thing is about. But mostly, when you go to the doctor, you'll find people are being more and more overweight. They go, hey, you're doing great on your cholesterol. Your triglycerides are getting a little up there, but your cholesterol's doing fine. Well, not so fine. It's kind of a mixed bag, really. And if you throw in cholesterol, look what happens here. Pounds overweight, triglycerides go higher and higher. As much as your cholesterol is going down, your triglycerides are going higher and higher. And think of this, through the rest of the video, it's like a seesaw. Whatever increases your triglycerides is going to decrease your cholesterol. So when triglycerides are up, cholesterol is down. So pounds overweight, here you go. It would look great if you didn't throw in the triglycerides. That's the point of that image. Okay, closer look. LDL cholesterol only, LDL cholesterol. What we did is, here's all the group of people that I've worked with. And it's probably about, on this particular spreadsheet, it's about 60 people. So that's what we're looking at, maybe 80, a bunch. And here's the trend line for that. And it simply says pound overweight and your LDL goes down. That looks great. In order to get under 100 as all undifferentiated population, they just need to be about 150 pounds overweight and they will have incredible LDL. What stupid advice, right? But that's true. Now let's break that category down into people who are insulin resistant under 1.5, 1.4 or less, and those who are insulin, so that was non-insulin resistant, insulin resistant people, all the others. Anybody above 1.4. So now let's look at them. Well, now these people who are insulin resistant in the red box, the red line, it shows that, geez, well, maybe, about 130 pounds overweight and they'll get perfect under 100 for LDL, which is the AMA recommended level. But the non-insulin resistant people have far higher LDL. Gosh, they're going to have to probably be 200 pounds overweight, which pretty much be impossible. They wouldn't be insulin resistant at that point. They wouldn't be non-insulin resistant at that point. So insulin, now we're going to break it down into insulin and glucose, which are the two components of HOMA-IR. So insulin and pounds overweight. So we do pounds overweight and insulin. What we find is the heavier you are, your insulin goes up. All right, pretty straightforward. We break that audience down, those people down into those who are insulin resistant. Absolutely, same thing. As they get heavier and heavier, their insulin goes higher and higher and higher. But look at this, non-insulin resistant people, their weight goes up, but their insulin does not go up. As their weight increases, their insulin does not increase. How is that? How is that possible? How is that correct? Did I do something wrong? All right, let's look at glucose. Glucose in pounds overweight. Same thing, more or less, but it's a steeper curve. Pounds overweight for everybody, donuts, right? Think of that, to get your glucose up there. Will increase your weight, or as your weight increases, your glucose. It's a correlation we're looking at. That's amazing. So higher pounds overweight, higher glucose. All right, now we break that audience down into insulin-resistant people and non-insulin resistant people. What do we find? Pounds overweight, the heavier they are, the higher their glucose goes. But wait a minute, this has got to be wrong. What did I do wrong? So possibly, this has got to be incorrect, don't you think? Pounds overweight, as a non-insulin resistant person gets heavier and heavier, their glucose goes down. How could that possibly be? It's another mistake. How can this possibly be true? Glucose decreases as non-insulin resistant people get heavier, have greater pounds overweight. That's amazing. What's the answer? The difference is muscle mass. The more muscle mass, the more glucose is consumed. So it's removed out of the blood and into the muscles, right? Out of the blood and into the muscles. So having lower fasting glucose with more pounds overweight as a non-insulin resistant person equals more muscle mass. This is just really phenomenal to me. So I had to rethink through this when I first came up with this a couple of months ago, because really what this shows is, yes, it's an indication of muscle mass with non-insulin resistant people. That's pretty cool. But what it actually shows is, hold that thought. This is the same group. You just saw this, pounds overweight in these two different groups. Now I did hemoglobin 1AC. Still the same thing. For insulin resistant people, their A1C goes even steeper up. But yet their A1C decreases with pounds overweight as a non-insulin resistant person. What the heck? This has got to be a mistake in I don't know. Now look at the levels to show you that I just sort of tried to measure them on two different graphs, that between 80 and 90 of glucose, 80 and 90 of glucose, is it pounds overweight? These are the same people. These are absolutely the same people. I could go back dot after dot and see if I find who, but these are the same people. It is correct so far, at least it's consistent mistake. We'll call it a consistent mistake. Consistent mistake number one. So why this is important is this. Why this scatter plot is so important, and yet it's so simple. It's just glucose and pounds overweight. Not very sophisticated. It shows people who have sarcopenia, meaning they're under-muscled. The penia is less, sarco is flesh actually, but it's come to mean muscle. So they have decreased muscle mass. They have insufficient muscle mass to control their glucose. They have insufficient muscle mass. So if you think of muscle mass as all your kids at a dinner table, and you have to feed all these mouths. So you have to feed all these mouths, and you're serving this big dinner, and you have all these mouths, and it all disappears. Every night, night after night after night, it just disappears. Well, do that same serving with fewer kids at the table, fewer people at the table, what's going to happen? You're going to have a lot of leftover food. That's like the glucose analogy. You're going to have a lot of glucose floating around in your blood. So the pounds overweight, this graph actually shows these people are sarcopenic. So these, not only they're insulin resistant, but they're sarcopenic. So this is now, that was insight from the graphs. Now I went over to saying, so is this being seen in the world at large? Are there studies that will support what I just saw and how I just interpreted this? Here we go. And the answer is yes, by the way. Here's the study. The impact of dysmetabolic sarcopenia among insulin-sensitive tissues, Italy, 2021. Let's read about it. In recent years, sarcopenia has been progressively recognized as, listen to this, muscular expression of metabolic syndrome, meaning that muscle mass in itself, good muscle mass means lack of metabolic syndrome. Lack of muscle mass, sarcopenia, is increased risk of metabolic syndrome. That's my paraphrasing. So linking sarcopenia, which is actually really pretty profound, to insulin resistance. Insulin exerts major metabolic and anabolic building up. In my view, it's less true, but this is what the study says, anabolic effects upon skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle is responsible for 80% of the postprandial glucose disposal. It means 80% of the glucose you eat. That donut that person just ate, 80% of a non-insulin resistant person is going to go to their muscles. If they don't have the muscles, it's going to stay in their bloodstream, and they have to figure out where to put it into the fat cells and so on. In addition, insulin promotes protein synthesis and limits protein catabolism. This last part is definitely true. The others I'm not quite sure about, but protein catabolism, bodybuilders inject themselves with insulin, not so much to dispose of the insulin, but to keep their muscle gains from breaking down. So impaired insulin action in skeletal muscle in the setting of insulin resistance affects both glucose metabolism, like I just explained, and the maintenance of proper muscle mass. Conversely, a reduced skeletal muscle functionality worsens insulin resistance. Like just what I said, those who don't have much in the way of muscle mass are really prone or prey for insulin resistance and contributes to the metabolic abnormalities of metabolic syndrome. The impoverishment of muscle mass, meaning not enough, or sarcopenia, refers to the unintentional weight loss, weakness, and slowing in daily activities. That's something you can do about it. I'm saying it's a real deal out there. Don't let yourself just get talked out of not going to the gym or whatever your activity is. You got to do something. This is part of being human. This process starts around in your 30s. So in your 30s, it gets more faster to break down muscle, and so therefore you have to exert yourself and be conscious, be responsible for saying, I now need to do certain activities. Could be sports, could be something else, but you need to engage. So that's what it says. Your responsibility goes up as your processes is more propensity for breaking down muscle is greater. This process starts in your 30s and becomes increasingly relevant with aging. In fact, sarcopenia is a major determinant of frailty in elderly. All this is from the same study, and of course you knew that. An extreme example of the value of muscle mass in controlling glucose levels is really a sumo wrestler, or you could say tackles for professional football teams. They are really big and strong and fat. And when you look into this, you do find that sumo wrestlers of all professional athletes do have the highest rate of insulin resistance, highest rate of diabetes. It's still very low, far lower than the general population, by the way. But relative to professional sports, they have the highest. And so still the same graph. As they are, think of a sumo wrestler way out here as being non-insulin resistant and yet way overweight. They're way overweight because it's just gender and height, okay? That's how it doesn't fit everybody, but it's a good place to start. And here is a really good place because it indicates their muscle mass. But when they stop wrestling, all that changes, and a lot of them do get into trouble. So they really consciously have to, they tend to keep eating and not working out, and then it's like those kids not showing up to dinner table, got all this excess food, your blood glucose gets higher and higher, as you know, but they change, or they don't. What you just saw, one, if you're insulin resistant, then your pounds overweight will probably be fat, excess fat, and low muscle mass. Two, if you're not insulin resistant, then your pounds overweight will probably be muscle. In other words, if you are overweight due to muscle mass, your glucose insulin would be great, but your LDL and total cholesterol will be an issue for your doctor, not for you. Two, be very insulin resistant to achieve perfect cholesterol. Be very insulin resistant. Kind of already know the answer to this because I showed you some of it. All right, here's that graph. Triglycerides, cholesterol. So here we have total cholesterol, LDL, HDL, and the green in this case is triglycerides. So here's the AMA's recommendations, and all these numbers, all the lipid numbers are great. They're doing great. They're getting better. They're getting better. The more insulin resistant you are. Except the only problem is your triglycerides are zooming through the roof. Now remember, everything that brings cholesterol down is going to bring triglycerides up. Okay, so glucose and cholesterol. Glucose, glucose, glucose. What we're doing, this is everybody, undifferentiated, pretty easy. This is what your doctor would take. Here's your glucose level, and here's your lipid panel. Yeah, your glucose is high, but your cholesterol is good, so I don't know what to do. I'm sorry, they're not. They're brighter people, but for the most part, that's the reality, and that's as far as they get. If they do what I do, which is breaking it down to insulin-resistant people, those are the people you really need to pay attention to, and non-insulin-resistant people, look at their reaction. The reaction is, again, their cholesterol is going to come down with higher glucose, but with non-insulin-resistant people, their cholesterol goes up. Their total cholesterol obviously goes up, your LDLs go up, and your HDLs go up. They go zooming up very quickly. So let's break that down. Insulin-resistant people, non-insulin-resistant people, they have diametrically opposite reactions to the same situation. Opposite reactions. One, cholesterol goes way up. And those with glucose, they're insulin-resistant people. Worse they are insulin resistance, the lower the glucose is the lower their lipids are gonna be, the lower their cholesterol and LDL and HDL are gonna be. Is that a good thing? You're gonna have to ask, which one is the healthier of this fork in the road? Okay, insulin-resistant people versus non-insulin-resistant people. Same thing, I just put it together on the same slide. Pretty straightforward. You go, what the heck? But you don't see it if you just put them all in one little kettle of fish and saying, yeah, generally higher glucose, your cholesterol goes down, your LDL goes down, it's all good. You break it down like this, absolutely opposite reactions. Insulin and cholesterol. Insulin across the bottom, we have everybody. We have insulin-resistant people, we have non-insulin-resistant people. Pretty much the same thing, but not as critical. In other words, the decline in the lines are not as steep. So for everybody, still the same thing. Well, yeah, your insulin goes up, your cholesterol is going to go down. You just keep doing what you're doing and get great cholesterol, right? Forget about the insulin. All right, insulin-resistant people, they're still going down, but it's almost flat, right? It's like, well, that's interesting. You know, it goes down. But insulin's not the mover here relative to cholesterol, it's the glucose. Remember, we're breaking down HOMA-IR? So now the insulin, for the non-insulin resistant people, this is really interesting. As their insulin goes up, it obviously can't go up very far because then they'd be non-insulin resistant. But for the little that it goes up, their HDL stays the same, their LDL goes up a lot, and of course their total cholesterol goes up. Same reaction, except that its insulin really doesn't affect their HDL. So looking at that comparison again, boom, insulin resistant people, non-insulin resistant people, putting it on the same graph, non-insulin resistant, boom, boom, boom. It's like opposite directions, opposite reactions. Who would have thought of that? So when your doctor just goes glucose, it doesn't look at you as insulin resistant or not, it's a big miss. Absolutely big miss. So the answer is clear. How to get perfect cholesterol is increase your glucose, your carbs, your refined carbs, starches, but refined carbs, I'd focus on that one if you're really after perfect cholesterol. And to increase your insulin, mostly your glucose. What happens with elevated insulin and elevated glucose? I put those two combined pictures together. The dotted lines are the insulin-resistant people in both cases. So notice that you can almost say with insulin, it's almost flat with insulin-resistant people in terms of total LDL and HDL, but with the non-insulin-resistant people, it goes up with total, of course, up with LDL, and pretty much flat with HDL. But with glucose, look at the difference. It is precipitous. It is precipitous. It's both precipitous up and it's precipitous down for insulin-resistant people. So now you're seeing there's a fork in the road here. Something's not quite right. Put them together, insulin and glucose in insulin resistance and HOMA-IR. So now we're back to where we started, saying total cholesterol, LDL, and HDL relative to increasing HOMA-IR. What do we say? So anything under 1.4 is non-insulin resistant. So all these people over here on this little space, this little inch of the whole graph, these are non-insulin resistant people, and they have the highest total LDL and HDL cholesterol. And it all starts to descend. And which one goes down the fastest? LDL. So the question is now, do you need to lower your cholesterol? And why would you? Just want to end on this note here. This is not just me thinking things yourself. This is a lot of research has come out. So here's what some studies have shown us. And I go through time and I go internationally so you get a broad understanding. Let's start a long time ago, 25 years ago, well, 30 years ago, 1994 at Yale, And it was published in JAMA. And here's a link to that if you want to chase it down. But here's the title of the study. Lack of an association between cholesterol and coronary heart disease and morbidity, which is not dying, but having heart disease, and all-cause mortality in persons older than 70 years old. Okay, now let's come up in time. 2005 in the US. High total cholesterol levels in late life associated with reduced risk of dementia. So high cholesterol and reduced risk of dementia, 2005. Now 2011, Japan. Low cholesterol is associated with mortality from stroke, heart disease, and cancer, 2011. All right, now 2018. 6 years ago, maybe. LDL does not cause cardiovascular disease. A comprehensive review of current literature, international. That was a great study, by the way. Very good. 2018. All right, now 2024. Is LDL cholesterol associated with long-term mortality? A retrospective cohort study from a large healthcare system, US. Amazing. I'm going to end on that. Part 2 coming up. So if this is something that you're interested in, that is a topic that I obviously go deeper in terms of labs, in terms of how to do it, in terms of why you would want to do it, various topics, as you've seen that I've done in the past, then please let me know below in a comment. Till then.